All right, what's up? Good morning, everybody. Good morning, PT on Ice. Happy Thursday. Hope everybody's doing fantastic. I just got back. I was in Nebraska. Actually, had a long stretch. I was in Nebraska teaching at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. So huge thanks to the wonderful turnout there and folks. We were actually able to broadcast to Kearney on the other side of Nebraska, and they had this great setup where we had a video camera right in front of me, and every individual group over in Kearney had their own TV, so they could watch it like I was standing right in front of them. So really awesome to see just kind of Nebraska's ingenuity in bringing their more rural areas into the fold. So we were able to have two different locations simultaneously. So huge thanks for that. Yeah, Nick, thanks for the help, man. And Nick Hall just said great weekend. Nick was over there helping with Jamie Everett. So those two were running the lab in Kearney, and then myself and Jessica Davis, Jessica Turner. We had Megan's help as well. We were all handling Omaha. So I think we had about 82 people at the course. So that was pretty intense. So that was great. Right before that, I was at South College. So big shout out to the new South College class. I got to meet all the new students. I'll be back down there again soon to work with those guys. So it's been a wonderful whirlwind. Was up in British Columbia there for a while as well. What's up, Jason? Good to see you, man. Hope all is well. Good. So yeah, it's been a whirlwind. I hope everyone's doing great. But let's dive into some stuff. We've got some stuff to talk about. So I really want to discuss today kind of the resurgence of the physical exam. And this is kind of a lecture at myself, and I'll explain why. Because I think that pendulum, even though we're aware of it, what's up, Justin? I think that pendulum swings, and I think we always have to keep a sharp eye on it. And this is a good example of where I think it's swung a bit on me. And so maybe some of you all can join me. We can have some discourse here and unpack this. So undeniably, the physical exam has gotten a bad rap. What's up, Jeremy? Good to see you, man. You know, for a number of reasons. I mean, number one, it's standing next to kind of the star sibling, right, of the subjective exam, where as the years have gone on and we've really seen what creates value and creates outcomes, the subjective exam has continued to get more and more importance and attention, right? Because it's where you form that therapeutic alliance. It's where you understand their goals and where they're coming from. It's where you understand their fears and their expectations. You unpack the irritability. You form your hypothesis list, and you even refine that during the history. There's so much during that subjective exam, so much interpersonally that we know influences our relationship, which then ultimately influences our outcome. And so there's been a shift, you know, over the years towards the importance of that and away from the physical exam. Simultaneously, we have acknowledged that our ability to get a good idea of the pathoanatomy driving symptom behavior is questionable at best in most cases. Right now, I spend most of my time in low back and neck pain, and it seems to be particularly questionable in that area, right? And what we mean by that is our ability with our hands during our physical exam to understand what tissue is the primary driver of the patient's symptom complaint is poor. It is poor, right? We are usually going to finish the exam not knowing what tissue is driving that symptom behavior. And that historically has been the primary goal of the physical exam, right? Like go in there and do special tests and do different things that would allow you to say, okay, this is the structure driving the problem. Well, if we can't do that, and if consistent evidence is building that that's not the case, well, then it really does force a re-examination of the physical exam. But I think that's what it forces, is a re-examination, right? We don't discard the physical exam. Right? We don't negate the physical exam. We re-examine what is its role and how do we maximize then the new benefits towards those new goals and those new aims, as opposed to saying that its value is simply reducing because we didn't understand what its role and what the object was. Okay, so the reason I'm bringing this up is because I recently consulted with a patient. And it was kind of a multi-part consult, okay? So I had several phone conversations. So in other words, we had a lot of subjective. The patient's already known to me, so the trust value is already there, the therapeutic alliance is in place, and I had a lot of information because we had a lot of time to talk on the phone. We actually had some back and forth on the web as well. So you could say that my quote-unquote subjective was quite lengthy, quite in-depth. It was multi-part, and so I had a lot going on from that perspective. But then We had a very brief physical encounter. Just due to the nature of our schedules and due to the way that we wound up actually being able to work together in person, that part was very brief. So my physical exam was very brief. Well, I can tell you this. I walked away from that end of the physical exam, if you will, and even trial treatment. I walked away from that very convinced that I knew what was going on and very unconvinced that the patient believed me. Right? Which was surprising. So I walked out to my car, right? And I had this very nagging feeling that the patient wasn't on board, right? I did not get there with the patient. I had a very low expectation that things were going to go well, that compliance was going to be high, the course of care was going to be successful, and I really left feeling empty and wanting. Right? And so I reflected on it quite a bit. Like, well, what happened there? Right? And furthermore, I followed up with the patient. So I really think it came down to two things, and they're both physical exam oriented. Because as I reflected on why isn't this patient bought in, I really didn't feel that I missed a ton in the subjective exam. Don't get me wrong, self-critical, always things that I could have asked better or done better. But overall, I felt like there was no glaring omissions in the subjective exam. I thought the patient trusted me as a provider. I thought I had all the requisite information, right? I thought I knew where we were going. We were on the same page. I understood the history, right? I pulled all of that in. I knew what they thought was going to help from historical information, from current information. The subjective exam didn't seem like it was real gappy. But the physical exam did, particularly in two areas. And I think that by recognizing the deficiency in these areas into affecting what happened with me and this individual really brings to the forefront the importance in a new way of the physical exam that we need to appreciate, right? So number one, I hadn't ruled out the patient's competing hypotheses. So we talk ad nauseum of going into a physical exam with your hypothesis list, right? I think either A, B, or C is the problem. Well, how do I need to design my physical exam to make sure I do the tests and measures and challenge this individual system in what ways to convince myself that it's one of these versus the others, right? How do I rule out competing hypotheses and get to a working hypothesis list so we can do a trial treatment and try to move on with confirmatory data, right? That's my hypothesis list though, not the patient's. Right? The patient presents with their own hypothesis list. They've been thinking about it for a lot longer than you have. Right? And they're thinking, I think it might be this, or this, or this, or I wonder if this is going to hold me back. Now, I'm usually decent at saying, what do you think is the problem? But undeniably there, I am asking for a single answer. Like, what do you think is the problem? I'm not asking the patient, hey, what is your hypothesis list? Right? What different things do you think might be the issue that your concern might hold us back from being successful? Right? I'm only asking for the one thing they believe is the primary driver. Right? And the issue with that is, during that physical exam, even though I'm doing what I need to do for me to be convinced, I'm not doing what the patient needs to do for them to be convinced. Because I might not be addressing all of their competing hypotheses. And I'll tell you where I've gotten sloppy. And this was made very clear to me during this exam is, I'm not taking that extra second to convince the patient beyond myself that a given hypothesis is not correct, is not the driver. Here's an example, and just so happens to be this very recent example, right? Differentially diagnosing, right? Let's say something like a proximal hamstring strain versus neural dynamic issues, right? An emerging radiculitis or radiculopathy or lumbar referral, right? One way we often do that, right, is neural dynamic assessment, right? So we get somebody in a slump test, if you will, right, and we bring on those relevant symptoms, and then we have that patient look up, right? And when that patient looks up, right, they say, oh, significant change in my leg, right? And that might add strength or support that it's more neural dynamic in origin and not so much proximal hamstring, right, or contractile tissue. Because if it was contractile tissue, you would not expect that looking up, right, would significantly change the severity of the leg symptoms, right? The problem is, I'm saying all this to you guys right now, but what I did during the physical exam was blow right by that, right? Once I got the data, I saw it, right? And to me, I said, okay, it's not contractile tissue. It's not hamstring. It's probably coming from the back. But I said that to myself and I moved on. I used to be hard on myself in really taking that second to say to the patient, hey, look, now I know you thought that it was coming from your hamstring, right? Can you appreciate that when we're in this position, your relevant symptoms are surfacing? But do you see how when you move your head up just a little bit, the symptoms totally vanish in your leg? Would that make sense if it was coming from a muscle in your leg? Would that neck position have that strong of an effect? Okay, that is a very powerful moment when used properly and when explained thoroughly to the patient to get them to where they can adequately rule out that competing hypothesis of contractile lower extremity tissue, right? But if you don't take that second to show them how you're thinking, right? Yes, you process that, but did you say, hey, I know you thought this is what it was, but do you see how this can kind of challenge that, right? All of a sudden then the patient goes, oh yeah, that would totally not make sense. Like if it was coming from a muscle in my leg, right? There's no reason my neck position would change it that dramatically. And now you have helped them get to their burden of proof and rule out that competing hypothesis. Well, that is what I did not do. And that's a really important moment. And I think it's a good gut check for me. And I think it's partly because overall, I have biased away from the importance of those things that need to happen during the physical exam. And that's one of them. Getting that patient the burden of proof they need to put their competing hypotheses to bed, so they can really focus on what they and I now believe is the working hypothesis. So that was one area I did not rule out the patient's competing hypotheses at a level of clarity that really allowed them to be on board with me, even though I was very confident. I had not gotten them to that level. That was problem number one. And I think that's a huge value of the physical exam. Right, that in this new era of physical exam importance, that's one of the things it does, right, is it helps to patients to realize this is not the issue or this is not the issue, right? And so it just bring those things to light can be of significant value, right? And, we talk about sharing the good news. I know Justin Dunaway has done a lot of episodes, so have I, talking historically about, sharing the good news in that these barriers aren't going to hold us back. And this came up here in this case too, but I think it's a broader concept that, people have all these different things that they are thinking are going to be obstacles. And during that physical exam is a great chance to show them it's not going to be a problem. Right? So you've got that patient with upper quarter issues, right, who's concerned that, their bad neck is going to hold them back, or that a chronic shoulder thing is going to limit them. It's your chance during that physical exam to actually mechanically challenge that area. And that's a unique thing about the physical exam is you can actually challenge with your hands. Hey, push against me. Listen, Janice, I don't know what you've been told, but if that is not a strong shoulder, I don't know what is. Right? Like there's no way that that's going to get in our way. I know you thought you might have had a rotator cuff tear or you heard something down the road, but I'm telling you right now, that shoulder is giving me a lot of juice. That is a good, strong shoulder. And just letting the patient know that these different things they're concerned about, right, they don't need to be as concerned about. It's not something that's probably going to challenge them down the road. So I think sharing the good news, what if we looked at our physical exam and as opposed to sharing everything wrong with the patient, what if we help them go through and see why all these different things going on aren't going to hold us back? Right? And then why don't we share the good news and say why all the things that are right with them are a great building block and foundation to grow from to solve the issue? Right? So why don't we do that? What a great chance to share the news and increase expectations. So I think that's another really big one is challenging some of these misconceptions and barriers that the patient perceives that really aren't reality. Right, and erasing those, and thus increasing expectation while we go along. So one of the big ones was not sufficiently ruling out competing hypotheses for the patient. Ruled them out for me, not for the patient. Number two was my physical exam was too brief for my reassurance to be powerful. Right, and this is something that I will often talk with Tim, my colleague here at Colorado in Motion here about is what is the baseline or the barrier to entry? How much evidence do you have to have for your reassurance to have value, right? Because there is a baseline level of thoroughness that you have to impart onto the patient so that when you say to them, hey, you're going to be fine, that actually has gravity, right? So we talk about that all the time in that probably the most important thing we do in a lot of cases. So for me, certainly in the work setting, right? So we're out at these companies and people are developing issues and we're having a look at them and letting them know, if it is fairly serious or if we should be able to go forward, no problem. One of the most important things we say to a patient is, it's going to be okay, right? We're going to be fine, right? I've had a good look at you and there's nothing here that convinces me this is going to be an ongoing problem. Okay, that's a great message. But the power of that message directly correlates to the amount of time to the patient that you have spent finding that to be the case, right? What I mean by that is the more thoroughly you examine that patient, and for a patient, the physical exam is certainly that part where they feel examined. I mean, you're moving them around, you're challenging different areas, you're testing their strength. I mean, to them, they are being looked at. They are being examined and palpated and tested. That is the exam part in many ways for them. That's oftentimes their perception. Well, the amount of time and thoroughness that we spend doing that, right? When that moment at the end comes where we say, Janet, I don't see anything here at all. And I've had a good look at you. I don't see anything that would convince me that we aren't going to move forward rapidly. Right? I know you had a bunch of concerns walking in, but I hope we fielded those. And if we haven't, let me know. Right? But boy, what I've seen, I think I've seen a lot. Right? I think I've certainly seen enough. I am very convinced that we're going to be able to make progress. And I expect that to be fairly rapid. Okay? The message of reassurance directly correlates with the time spent creating it for the patient. Now I know, and again, this is where we struggle. I know that we might be very convinced early on, but it doesn't mean the patient is. I know to us it might look like first episode, right? Acute, benign, non-radicular back pain with a positive overall psychological framework, right? Good psychosocial status and beliefs. That all looks positive prognostic to us, right? But it doesn't mean that's where the patient's coming from. To them, that could be the way their brother started an episode of back pain that led to disability that changed their life for the worse, right? To them, their presentation could be scary because of where it's brought other people they know. To them, what it correlated to what they found on Google was terrifying. So to them, that little snapshot doesn't look like a positive prognosis. It looks terrifying. And if we don't take enough time to do enough things, right, to do enough tests and measures and be thorough enough, when we do turn to them and say, I've had a look at you, it's going to be fine, we haven't hit the burden of proof. And so I think I really need to reflect as a clinician, and I hope we all do, those of us that have gotten more and more brevity with our physical exam, because we do recognize the limitations of it. And we do want to avoid over-examining the irritable, right? There are reasons that we have challenged the amount of focus in the physical exam. But I think we have to gut check a little bit and say, are we abbreviating it too much? Right? Are we failing to meet the baseline level of what is considered by the patient to be a thorough examination, an adequately thorough examination, so that when we use those power words, it's going to be okay. The patient believes it. Right? That's the big question. Right? Have we hit the point that when we say, John, I've had a good look, man, there's so much, first of all, there's a lot going right here, right? I mean, I was really concerned going in, but now that we've had a really good look, I really think we're going to be okay. That when that sentence comes out of your mouth, it resonates with the patient. That they say internally, yeah, this person did have a really good look, right? And I trust them. And if they believe I'm okay, I think I'm going to be okay, right? What is that minimum burden of proof, and are we hitting it? So just some food for thought. So just a couple things that even though the ability of our physical exam to really specifically differentially diagnose tissue-specific pathology has become challenged, right? There's still a tremendous amount of value here, right? And one of those things is helping the patient realize what the problem isn't, right? Their competing hypotheses. So maybe when you ask your patient, what do you think is going on? Maybe a better question is, what things do you think might be involved? Right? What barriers do you see? What do you think is going on? And what do you think might be holding you back from getting better? Maybe at the end, asking that question, right? What do you think might be going on? What do you think is holding us back? What concerns do you still have? But unpacking that a bit more to make sure it's not just your hypothesis list that you're ruling in and out during your exam, but that you address the patients as well. And then number two, thinking about the power of the physical exam as being what probably from the patient's eyes drives the most belief underneath your reassurance, right? And are you hitting that minimum viable product, right? Are you hitting that point where you have done enough to the patient that when you say they're going to be okay, they believe you, right? So maybe the physical exam doesn't have the value that we used to think that it had, but maybe there's still a ton of value there, and maybe, as I think happens in my case, maybe excessive brevity is beginning to creep into our physical exam, and we're missing key things from the patient's perspective, and we're not getting to the point to where our most important message, I've had a good look at you, and it's going to be okay, is not resonating near as deeply as it should. Certainly some thoughts for me coming away from my recent patient, and hopefully some thoughts for you. So let me know what you guys think. Course-wise, ton of stuff coming up. I'm going to be in Chico, California, doing cervical spine. So if you guys are in Northern California, I will be in Chico next weekend. This weekend, Labor Day weekend, RJ Williams is kicking off our vestibular course. So RJ put together a comprehensive vestibular course, includes concussion training, concussion management, all sorts of differential diagnostics with central dizziness and peripheral dizziness. You guys, if you're in the vestibular world, this course is going to be an absolute game changer. So it's the first offering is in Portland this weekend, and then we're going to have them offer it multiple times a year. So lots of good stuff coming up. Vice is open, right? So if you want to jump in the virtual mentorship, registration's open. I think it's open for like another week and a half, maybe tops. So if you want to jump in, because if we lock it down then for the quarter, and there's no registration during the quarter because we want to stay organized on delivering the content. So if you want to be in the virtual mentorship, every week, so every single Tuesday. This Tuesday, Morgan Denny was talking about primary care PT and diabetes, kind of what our role is, and every single week, one of our faculty is on live. Our Facebook group has case studies rolling, so 52 weeks a year, you can find us on Vice. So if you want to jump into the virtual mentorship, go check out the new website, and there is a new website. I know a lot of us have mentioned it. We revamped the website. Huge thanks to Dustin Jones for time spent there. The website looks much, much cleaner, much better. So jump on there, get registered. I'll see you guys soon. Think about that physical exam. Lord knows I'm going to.